Namaste, welcome to Arthaniti. Today, let us simplify the budget. We have heard hours and hours of discussions from experts in varied fields about their expectations from the Union Budget 2022. They have been talking about this sector and that sector and how the spending is going to happen and what they expect from Nirmala Sitharaman in this year's budget. But what is a budget? What are the different parts of a budget? Let us simplify that. If you know your basics, you will be able to understand well what Nirmala Sitharaman says on 1st of February 11 a.m. So let's start. So then, what is a budget? Let us start with the very basic. A budget is a plan, an estimate, a blueprint of the proposed income and expenditure that the government will undertake for a future period of time. What is this future period of time? It is a period starting from 1st April and ending on 31st March the next year. So this 1 year period is either called a fiscal year or financial year. Budget is bifurcated into two categories: revenue budget, capital budget. Let us focus on the revenue side first. Now, revenue budget is again subdivided into revenue receipts and revenue expenses. Revenue receipts are all the incomes that the government receives regularly. They are again subdivided into tax receipts and non-tax receipts. Tax receipts include all the taxes that the government collects: income tax, customs duty, excise duty, GST, etc. Non-taxable receipts are, say, interest that the government receives on the loans it has given to, say, state governments or other countries, or dividends that the government receives from its investments in public sector undertakings, the fees and the charges that the government collects on the services it gives to the general public. All these form part of non-taxable receipts. Revenue expenses, the second part of the revenue budget, are all the spendings that the government undertakes on a day-to-day basis in the course of its activities. Now, what are these revenue spendings? They can be salaries to government employees, pensions to retired government officers, interest that the government pays to the loans it has taken. All these form part of the revenue expenses. So, revenue budget bifurcated into revenue receipts and revenue expenses. Coming to the second part now, capital budget. Again subdivided into capital receipts and capital expenses. Capital receipts. What are capital receipts? Capital receipts can be debt or non-debt. Now, what is a debt? Debt is a loan. So, any kind of loan that the government raises, say from the public or from another country, from a foreign financial institution or from RBI for a longer period of time, form part of the debt component of capital receipts. Non-debt component of capital receipts can be repayments that the government receives of the loan that it has given to states or financial institutions, or divestment of government's stake in public sector undertakings. Like LIC is about to get divested, and the DIPAM secretary has already said that by March end, government will dilute its stake in LIC. So whatever proceeds that the government raises from dilution of its stake in LIC will form part of the non-debt capital receipts of the government. Capital expenditure, very, very important component of a budget, capex as it is normally called. Now, what is this expenditure? Now, this expenditure creates assets over a long period of time. Why is this necessary? It is necessary. Why? Because it helps in increasing the employment in the country. It helps in increasing the income generation streams of the people by setting up ancillary allied units for the assets that are built by the government. What are the examples of capital expenditures? Say infrastructural development, that projects that the government undertakes, like highways or building airports, seaports, setting up communication lines, all expenses which help in setting up an asset and creating an income stream over a longer period of time are capital expenditures. Very, very important component and something that you should look out for when Nirmala Sitharaman gives her speech on the budget. Now, basically, what I told you is how the budget is laid out. What are the components of the budget? One thing that you should understand is the budget is normally a balancing act between the receipts, like the sources from which government raises funds, and the spending that the government undertakes based on the incomes that it has generated. It is normally a balancing act. But when the balance does not happen, there is either a surplus or there is a deficit. Now, when the expenses are more than the income that the government generates, it is called as a deficit budget. So how is the Indian budget? Is it in surplus or is it a deficit? Well, Indian budget has fiscal deficit. What does that mean? The overall expenses undertaken by the government exceed the income that the government generates from various sources. The government had proposed a fiscal deficit of 6.8% of the GDP for the current financial year. There is an act called Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. Now, this act mandates the central government to keep the fiscal deficit below 3% of the GDP. Nirmala Sitharaman, in her speech last year, said that the government planned to reduce the fiscal deficit below 4.5% of the GDP not before 2026. So that is still 4 years ahead. So you can understand, you can estimate the kind of spending the government is looking at in the development of infrastructure in the country, which is not going to stop in the near future. Well, these are the basics. These are the points on the basis of which a budget is laid out. And when you listen to the budget, try bifurcating the speech into the different categories that I just explained you in this video. If you have any queries, please mention them below this video in the comments section and I will be happy to solve them. Before leaving, please like, share and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more such informational videos. Goodbye.